Hi everyone, Aaron here for Zollotech, and iOS 17.1.1 released to the public this past week, and iOS 17.2 Beta 2 is out to developers and public beta testers. We'll talk about the overall experience. We'll also talk about what you had to say in the YouTube community poll based on your experience, where there's over 25,000 votes at the time of this video and 292 comments. We'll read some of those comments toward the end of the video. First, we'll talk about news, then we'll talk about some new features that were found in iOS 17.2 Beta 2 since the initial What's New video that I released. But the first thing I wanted to mention is Apple has actually started raising the prices of their trade-in values on specific devices. So as the holiday sales start, if you have an Apple Watch from a Series 7 to an Ultra to an iPad Pro, some of the trade-in values have actually been increased in price. So from $510 up to $580, by as much as $70 for some of the devices. I'll link in the website where you can check out your trade-in values below if you're thinking of maybe trading something in to get a new Apple device. Apple also announced Artist of the Year this past week, where they announced Taylor Swift as the Apple Music Artist of the Year for 2023. That's on their Apple Newsroom site, along with a new iPhone photography exhibition which debuted in Paris the other day. So I'll link these in the description if you want to check them out yourself. I think it's pretty incredible that people are taking such amazing photos and placing them in an exhibition in Paris. But that's something that I think the iPhone is good enough at now that it makes sense. Now, one thing I did want to mention is WhatsApp added a new significant privacy update. If you use it for phone calls, you can now actually hide your IP address when making those phone calls. Since it sort of makes a peer-to-peer connection when you're making those phone calls, what happens typically is if someone wants to, they could figure out what your IP address is and then figure out where your network is located and maybe try to attack that. Within Settings, under Privacy, if you scroll down to Advanced, under Advanced is a new option for Protect IP Address in calls. I would highly recommend you enable that just to keep things that much more safe. Now, something else I wanted to mention has to do with iMessage before we talk about new features. iMessage is the latest thing to come under attack by the EU, trying to get them to open this up so that others can use it. Google's long been pressing Apple to incorporate RCS messaging, which is something I think Apple should do, but the European Union actually wants to make it more open so that maybe it's a standard that everyone can use and access. So that's something we may see, as they did implement USB-C across many devices. Now it looks like they want to regulate iMessage. Let me know what you think about that in the comments below. Now, we've been waiting for new features such as sideloading for some time, and it looks like iOS 17.2 may incorporate the code necessary for that to work. 9to5Mac actually found that iOS 17.2 has a new public framework called Managed App Distribution. Basically, the framework is there and appears to allow third-party apps to install other apps, which means it's sideloading another app. This was long thought to be something Apple would have to do due to new laws in the European Union. It's not active yet, but finally we may be able to load apps just like we can on Mac. I don't think that's necessarily a bad idea, as those that want to maintain the highest security can just use the App Store. Otherwise, you could sideload them from other websites in the future. However, as noted by Aaron P613 on X, this seems to be specific to developers based on a new support document Apple released, so it may have nothing to do with sideloading altogether, but we'll have to wait and see. Now, in iOS 17.2 Beta 2, we're seeing the widget on the lock screen for Wind being reverted back to what we had before. On the right, I have Beta 2, on the left is Beta 1, and we had this nice new widget that showed the speed and actual direction of wind. I wish they'd bring that back, or at least give us an option. It seems like they've gone back to the previous style. Now, also, they've updated the widget on the lock screen. I noticed this earlier today. This seemed to be a little bit new, and it doesn't look different right now, but I took a screenshot, and you'll see here that it actually shows the status of what's expected in the widget itself. Typically, I would get a notification, and it would look a little different. Now we're seeing the entire status with the time given for expect light rain in the next hour. So that's something I saw earlier today that I hadn't seen before. Let me know if you've seen that before, though. Within the App Store, if we go into Games, you'll see we now have categories at the top with sort of a scroll bar where we can select between them. The same is true if we go into Apps. You'll see here across the top we have things such as entertainment, photos and videos, and then we can go right into those. Additionally, if we go down and maybe you have some suggested apps, some people are seeing more suggested apps than they had before, maybe 4 or 5 of them instead of just a couple. So that change I haven't seen, but this change along the top is definitely new. Within the Journal app, some people are seeing a new splash screen giving more information, and we're also seeing more suggestions even from third-party apps. So I knew the suggestions were actually fixed with Beta 2, but not that they were working with third-party apps as well. Additionally, a viewer sent in that they found that when they asked Siri to place a phone call, it asked them what app they wanted to use. This may have been there since Beta 1, but Apple seems to be adding more features to Siri as of Beta 2, so this seems to be new. Let me know if you've seen this before as well. Now, as far as new updates, iOS 17.0.2 is no longer being signed by Apple. That means you can no longer downgrade to it. Typically, as new versions come out, they'll stop signing them. You can no longer downgrade to them. And that means we could get newer updates very soon. And the reason I say that is we still have that Wi-Fi bug that Apple said iOS 17.2 seems to patch. However, we still have about a month or more until that should be released. So iOS 17.1.2 is possible maybe within the next couple weeks. If not, we'll have to wait until the final release of iOS 17.2, which is likely probably in the second week of December. That's what Apple did last year on the 13th. As far as the betas, iOS 17.2 Beta 3 could be expected as soon as next week. I looked back at iOS 16.2 betas, and after Beta 2, it became a weekly cycle. So iOS 16.2 Beta 2 released on the 8th, and then on the 15th, they released iOS 16.2 Beta 3. So it's possible we could have a similar release cycle with a final release in the second week of December. But at the rate we're seeing betas and different updates, I wouldn't be surprised at all if Apple actually pushes out iOS 17.1.2. Now, as far as the iOS 17.1.1 experience, it seems that it's fixed most of the issues that they've said. The main issue was the widget for weather not working properly on the lock screen and sort of having a little icon there instead where it would represent maybe snow, but it was just a little piece of paper. That's been fixed, along with the BMW overheating issue. Now, Apple didn't say BMW specifically, but basically wireless charging in certain cars was getting so hot when it was charging that it would cause problems with the NFC chip. They've fixed that, and hopefully it's fixed it for you if you have a BMW or any other car you're wireless charging. I'd love to hear from you if whether or not it's getting too hot or it seems much cooler than it did before. Now, as far as issues that still remain with iOS 17.1.1, overall it seems to be a pretty good experience. Apple's really moving forward, making things better. But at this point, there's still some issues. In fact, somebody actually said that other than everything else working well, when you actually use Notes to scan a document, you can no longer select text. I found that to be true. I tested it out on my phones. I scanned a document. I couldn't select the text at all. It wouldn't let me do it. So it just wasn't an option unless you actually took a screenshot, put it into Photos, then you could select the text. So maybe they made that change, but it seems to be there since iOS 17. Additionally, some people still have that keyboard bug where you swipe down and search and it doesn't show up. I actually have that in iOS 17.2 Beta 2. The overall experience of iOS 17 has been sharpened, though, and seems to be much better, but it still has a little ways to go. As far as iOS 17.2 Beta 2, it seems to be pretty good overall. As far as the camera goes, I did want to test it this week. I thought we wouldn't do that this time, but some people were actually saying that the camera actually isn't as good as it was with previous versions. Typically, they say it's not even as good as it looks in the viewfinder, so I thought I'd take a few pictures here, as you can see. Let me know if you think they look as good as before the beta. Also, I wanted to mention connectivity. AirPods actually were updated to version 6B32 the other day. I did a video on that. However, connectivity with them seems to be worse, and unfortunately, there's no way to stop the update. After I updated right away, it seemed to work. You'll see how long it took to just show up on my phone. It's open here. It's not showing up on Beta 2. It seems there's some odd issues with connectivity. There, it finally showed up. So there's some weird issues this time around. Everything else seems to be better. Noise cancellation seems much better. I was using it tonight and I could barely hear anything that was around me. So I think they've improved a lot of things, but that connectivity issue's there, and it jumps between devices sometimes, and it shouldn't be doing that. So hopefully they'll fix that again very soon. As far as cellular connectivity, iOS 17.1.1, I really haven't heard any complaints about for the most part, other than Wi-Fi issues. But as far as cellular with 5G and LTE, most people say it's pretty good. With the beta, it's only been out about a day or so, so it's going to take a little bit more time to test, but so far it's been pretty good. I haven't noticed anything that's out of the ordinary. It's working as you would expect. As far as other issues, well, the wallpaper bug I mentioned last week, as far as it becoming unsaturated, you set the wallpaper, swipe home, and it would sort of desaturate itself. I'm actually not seeing that. Well, I am seeing that now as I'm actually talking about it. So as I swipe down, you'll see it's vibrant, swipe up, and it sort of dims right away. I'm not sure why that happens. Sometimes a reboot fixes it, sometimes it doesn't, but it seems to still be there. It wasn't until tonight. Also, the keyboard's disappearing, as I mentioned before, and one user even reported that the ghosting issue returned with Beta 2, where it looks like they have burn-in. They fixed this in a previous update, but it looks like they're having that in Beta 2, so something there is causing that again. Also, some people are saying storage is taking up excessive amounts. Many tens, maybe 100 gigabytes or so. I actually haven't seen this, but if we go into storage here, iPhone storage under general, I'm only using 73 gigabytes. We'll now set 62 gigabytes. And if we scroll down, you'll see everything's normal as far as system data and everything else. So some people were saying apps were using a tremendous amount of data for some reason. Now, if you have an app that's using it, you can go into that and sort of delete things as needed. If you have iPhone issues there we go. We can go in, offload the apps, delete the apps and more if we need to, but for the most part, storage seems to be working properly for most people, but some people report very excessive storage. Other than that, though, there's not much more to talk about as far as bugs, other than the ones that are listed in the feedback app here. So if we go in to the notes, I mentioned these in the What's New video, there's some known issues, but most of these things are really on the back end as far as development goes, such as landscape mode is not supported for journaling suggestions API. That's a known issue, but you're not going to notice that just yet. Most things are pretty much fixed at this point. It seems much better. Now, as I mentioned in the What's New video and another video, Apple is working on iOS 18. They get right to work right away, and they have hundreds of people working on different code. However, they found it to be extremely buggy after the first release and took a break to work specifically on bugs. I'm really hoping they look at our feedback, maybe watch this video and others out there talking about the current issues. We cover them every week, and hopefully they're actually seeing that so they can resolve some of those issues. Now, as far as performance and heat, well, performance is pretty good overall. You saw this here. I even shared the Geekbench scores the other day where they were pretty phenomenal after just using it a couple minutes and then running Geekbench. I ran it twice and the numbers are pretty high. 7,240 for multi-core, 2,922 for single core. So really nice and high, what you would expect for this version. No issues with performance. Everything is fast and smooth and it's staying nice and cool. And I wanted to ask you, do you want to see the thermal camera every time or just if it's maybe excessive? But I'll show you in this video. Let me know your thoughts on that in the comments below. But let me show you 17.1.1 and 17.2 Beta 2. Now keep in mind, I've been holding this phone the entire video for the most part, so it is warmed up to basically my hand temperature for the most part. Now at the hottest point, we're at about 32.6 degrees Celsius, and then on 17.1.1, we're at about 29.9. And on Beta 2 in Fahrenheit, we have 91.5 degrees, and on 17.1.1, about 86 to 87 degrees. So pretty good overall. Consistent, nice and cool. I'm not playing games on them, but they're nice and cool to the touch. And remember, my hand's warming it up just from holding on to it. Now, as far as battery life, let's take a look at the battery cycles here. Unfortunately, they haven't added this yet to older devices, but if we go into general, then about, you'll see I currently have 40 cycles, so not terrible. I've been using it full time that way, so it's not really bad at all. I wish they'd add that to other devices, and you can see Coconut Battery here with all of the stats. If we go down to battery health and charging, I'm at 100% battery capacity, and we'll take a look at 17.1.1 battery as well, but you'll see yesterday it said 10 hours and 46 minutes of screen active time, 2 hours and 59 minutes of screen idle time. This is because I'm using standby. So again, today, 10 hours, it seems phenomenal, but it's counting standby while it's on the charger. If we look at a couple days ago, you'll see 3 hours and 54 minutes. So if you're not using standby, it definitely makes a difference there. So it is getting me through the day. Typically by the end of the day, I'm around 50%. I've been using this all day. I'm down to 44%. So based on the last 24 hours, again, it's counting that standby mode as well. And as far as iOS 17.1.1, thanks to Connor for sending this in, you'll see he had 7 hours and 39 minutes of screen active time, 2 hours and 16 minutes of screen idle time. Safari's using a lot of his power as well. I had that issue before, and you'll see 50% of his battery was used. So that's okay. It's not phenomenal because this is probably including standby as well. Apple really needs to fix the battery graph. I've seen other people post on Twitter or X that they're having similar issues with the battery graph just not being accurate. Now, as far as watchOS 10.1.1 battery, many people have reported back that it did specifically fix their issue with battery life. That's what it was released for, and it seems to resolve the issues with watchOS 10.1. So that's good news, but it does take a couple days for everything to stabilize from what I'm hearing. Now, as far as if you should install iOS 17.2 Beta 2, I would say hold off if you're not sure at this point. Maybe wait for Beta 3 or Public Beta 3. However, iOS 17.1.1 I would recommend you install, as it's just a bug fix and security update, and most people are pretty happy with the battery life. But let's go ahead and take a look at what you had to say. Calvin4682 said, I'm running iOS 17.1.1 on my iPhone 12 Pro Max. iOS is very stable, very good battery life. No network connectivity issues, no dropped calls, browsing is excellent, and there are no latency issues. Weo was taken says iOS 17.1.1 on iPhone 14 Pro Max feels great, battery is more stable, and it never heats up unless I play for 3 hours straight on max graphics. I usually play PUBG Mobile, and by the way, it barely heats up. Also stable 90 frames per second in PUBG Mobile, and 120 frames per second in other apps. Won't be upgrading to 15 or 16 for sure. Mike Archer, Haunted Soldier, said 15 Pro Max battery seems great on 17.1.1. However, with prolonged use, such as the 4-day event I'm attending, the back and screen have become more than warm, bordering on hot to touch. Not sure if the latest update got rid of the overheating issue in the previous update. We are going back and forth and back. Hope there's a bug fix soon. iOS 17.1.1 has been really great so far on my 13 Pro Max. Battery champ this iOS version. Jeff V71 says 14 on iOS 17.2 Beta 2 and everything seems smooth, battery life unchanged but solid, and no overheating. Interesting to note, on Series 9 Watch, the latest beta, battery improvement is noticeable. BSE Wall said 13 Pro Max on 17.2 Beta 2, battery life seems greatly improved so far, but it will take a few days to be sure. Journal app is greatly improved as well. I love how it makes suggestions from third-party apps. Using an external keyboard makes it a pleasant process to journal daily. So that's everything with iOS 17.1.1. Apple keeps making patches that are fixing little issues here and there. Hopefully it's much more stable than we've seen in the past. Of course, iOS 17.2 brings all of the final features we've been waiting for, and hopefully we get some surprise ones, maybe some new emoji or anything else like that would be welcome. Let me know if you've found any additional features in the comments below, and I'll link this wallpaper in the description like I normally do. If you haven't subscribed already though, please subscribe, and if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. As always, thanks for watching. This is Aaron. I'll see you next time.